Hello, my name is Arpit Joshipura. I head up networking, edge, and IoT at the Linux Foundation. And today's talk is very interesting. It's on AI agents, where open source opportunities and challenges come in, specifically as it relates to networking. And I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for the invitation. I will briefly cover an introduction to the Linux Foundation, then get into some of the trends. And I've coined the term marketecture. So it's not really a full architectural stack, but it is close enough. And then we will start using the framework that we have built for the agents. And lastly, I'm going to cover how we are enabling end-to-end open source AI. For those of you who are not familiar with the Linux Foundation, we are the largest nonprofit globally to create the largest shared investment and build ecosystems across a whole bunch of technologies and industries. And we are behind some of the most critical projects, whether it's telecom, whether it's automotive, whether it's cloud, we're there. And we host over 1,000 projects. And most of the projects are organized in a very logical manner, shown here as a sample. We have foundations like CNCF and Open Infra that are horizontal in nature. They impact multiple verticals, LFAI and data, OpenSSF, etc. And then we have foundations or sub-foundations or projects that are within a telecom domain or within a finance domain or any of these vertical domains. There are also technology projects that like RISC-V or LF Decentralized Trust that focus on blockchain. So you can see that there's a method by which we are organized. And so today I'm not going to talk about all of this, but how AI has come in more than just the horizontal layer that you see here. Okay. When we get to telecommunications and networking, we have a lot of support from our China colleagues, China Mobile, China Telecom, Huawei, etc., on figuring out how to do end-to-end open source software. So this diagram shows projects that are everything from RAN up to the core, including things like Nefio, which is automation for cloud-native network functions, ONAP, etc. And then there are AI applications that cut through the stack, which I'll cover in just a bit. So with that background, let's go into the topic today, which is AI agents. So let me start off with the trends. Just to baseline the definition, we're moving from a chatbot type response to actually doing work. And we have seen a whole bunch of companies that have already started deploying AI agents, whether it's Salesforce or Anthropic or OpenAI, or each of these have their own agents that do specific things. And what happens is, and there's huge interest on agentic AI, but what happens is when agents meet network, which is what I call domain-specific AI, then they have to do things that are important to that domain. And that's the most important. And if you start doing this across 1,000 domains, now you just have fragmented the entire agent landscape. And that's where open source comes in. It's neutral architecture, shared protocols, conformance, so that you don't have to duplicate it again and again and again. Okay? So how does the architecture look? This actually is a very simplified view of everything I showed you in the previous diagram is in the blue at the bottom. And I call it AI infrastructure, or network, or cloud. Depends on your definition. There's a layer of governance on top, which we call responsible AI. Extremely important. And then in the middle is where all the action is, but it is different for different organizations. There's all the models, then there's all the operations, whether it's LLM ops or agent ops. So connections, data sources, registry, pipelines, things like that. And then on top, you have all the agents, including an orchestrator, that talk to each other through protocols like A2A and all. And then you have all these apps that have gone up. And what we are seeing is as you go down, the cost and the commonality and open source value increases, cost decreases, value increases. And on the top, the innovation goes up because that's where the differentiation comes in. Okay, so keep this diagram in mind because I'm going to come back to this again and again. Okay. Now, if you look at the green, which is, again, let me go back, the top part, applications or agents, there are so many agents. You can actually build an agent in any of the cloud in 3 minutes. It won't do anything that's fancy for enterprise, but that's how easy it is. Okay, it's like putting a code on GitHub and calling it a project. There's millions of projects on GitHub. They're not useful. The ones that are useful are in a foundation, like Linux Foundation. So just like that, there are tons of agents, voice agents, agentic RAG agents, protocol agents, and more interesting coding agents like Cursor, etc. So that make up the top part here on the right-hand side. But the bottom part, and again, I know it's hard to see, but that's by design. There's a very complex game at the bottom on how you pull it together. And technology fragmentation for the agent stack and infrastructure is not something that we as an industry can tolerate, and that's where open source helps. So how do you want to run it, and how do you want to build it, and how do you want to connect it is really the next section. So from an open source perspective, we look at 4 things. We look at reference implementation, we look at conformance, we look at interoperability, and we look at requirements. Okay, are they baked in? Can these things happen across multiple agents in a common way? That's the requirements. And so we start breaking down the problems into 3 pillars of open source AI today. The first one is training. That's where bulk of the last 1 year's focus has been. PyTorch, DeepSeek, Volcano, Kubeflow. There's dozens more. Then you come to inference, which is really the model serving part. There you have, Onyx and VLLMs and LM Cache and tons of those things. And then you have agents. And that's where things get complicated because it's connecting models to humans, humans to tools, tools to apps, apps to data, data to agents. It's quite complex. So the initial discussion in the industry is all about protocols, MCP, agent to agent. There's a gateway, then there's an MCP server. So they're just trying to figure out the connectivity part, but there's a lot more to it than this. Okay. And so we are envisioning what we're calling an agentic operating system. So think like whether it's a NAS, network operating system, or a kernel like Linux, it does the same thing and it does it well and it does it in a common manner, right? Whether you build, run, or connect. And so we're starting to see a lot of common components come into the agentic operating system. And so that's where open source shines. And that's what we're looking at the Linux Foundation. Okay. So what are we doing to help this whole trend? First of all, we have LFAI and data as a foundation, a massive scale, 65 plus projects, 3,000 organization. And that's the horizontal layer that I've shown it. Okay. Most of that gets done in the model survey. Okay. And so that's kind of that part. Of course, PyTorch is there on the model training part. And then on the agents and on the verticals, we start looking at domain-specific AI. And what that means is the middle one is really the horizontal. But let's say this is telecom. So we have projects under a foundation called LF Networking that look at telecom-specific data sets, telecom-specific models and use cases. And then they utilize the generic models and the generic compute and the generic licenses that are created. And this is true for networking. This is true for energy. This is true for finance, right? We're using the same logic of doing domain-specific AI. Okay? And so one example of a domain-specific AI in networking is shown here. Let's say you want to create an AI application. And so what does the user have to do? The user has to connect it with the infrastructure at the bottom. He has to connect the application to the data sets, all the lifecycle management, MLOps, connect it with the governance, utilize all these services and packages that exist, right, for vision and language or whatever, and then push it in production. A long time. And that's just one AI application or one agent. Another one comes in, you have to do it again. So now what we are starting to see is projects like SDM and Salus that are AI frameworks to accelerate the creation of AI apps and AI agents. SDM will integrate to the cloud, integrate to the data sources. You just point and you focus on the application and the agent. Everything else is taken care of. Salus is a responsible AI toolkit that is integrated with SDM that you don't have to worry about lifecycle and governance. So this is actually very important and interesting because this is how the middle layer is getting solved. And this SDM project is under the LF networking umbrella. It was donated by a platinum member, and it's kind of made it into code now, and it's kind of building up the community now. But you can see how this works. And then there's other projects that get pulled in, right? Like, as I said, PyTorch, DeepSpeed, Onyx, VLLMs, etc., Kserve. And then on the Connect side of things, you have the A2A and the agency, which is now part of Linux Foundation. A2A, Google donated to the Linux Foundation. So a lot of these things in the Connect side of things are now hosted by the Linux Foundation so that we can create a collaborative entity and allow for a broader adoption globally across countries. Okay. So with that said, the call to action is very simple. Start contributing. If you're a developer, operators, you do need to bring in real workloads and define SLAs and start participating. And guess what? We have in Linux Foundation, we have the LF networking, LF AI and data, foundations like that would be very excited to have you on. And with that, I'm going to wrap it up here. If there are any questions, feel free to visit the website with all these projects. But looking forward to being there in person in 2026. But have a good rest of the conference, and thank you again for giving me the opportunity.